Montaigne once said that death has us by the scruff of the neck at every moment, but did he forget to mention that one could maybe escape its grip? Or did he leave that part out on purpose because death is inevitable, and the ones to claim immortality had nothing but lies on their tongues? Throughout history, many have claimed to have achieved immortality, a life without death. But was it really true? In this video, join me as I tell you the tales of people who claim to be immortal. Some of these tried to stay alive, while others managed to fool death multiple times. So what are you waiting for? Let's get started. Number 1. James Schaeffer. James Bernard Schaeffer is probably one of the weirdest people to have lived on this earth, and I'll tell you all about it. Schaeffer, known as the founder and leader of a cult called Royal Fraternity or Master Metaphysicians, created quite the news in his time. The cult in question is often described as a mix of several religious doctrines. And yes, it was a shiny rabbit hole that attracted many rich people. These so-called believers were not shy of spending money, and thanks to them, Schaeffer had enough wealth to get his hands on a 110-room mansion on Long Island. This mansion was named Peacehaven by this dude, and yes, I know what all of this might remind you of. Sounds like that Epstein Island, right? But wait until I tell you the rest of the story. This mansion was actually for the closest of his followers, and he preached about his own doctrines and rules. Among others, 2 claims he made stood out and potentially caused his death as well. He stated that he had the ability to dematerialize whatever came his way, and that all the diseases were just the aftermath of destructive thoughts. After this, in 1939, it was reported that he had brought a baby to the mansion. Her name was Jean Gaunt, and no one really knows where she is now. Anyways, back to the story. Schaeffer himself never claimed to be immortal, but he did claim to raise a child who was immortal, and the child in question was Jean. Now the problem was, Jean wasn't really his own daughter, nor did he legally adopt her. Instead, her parents had to give her away because they were too poor to take care of her. Schaeffer actually wanted to raise her in a way that would make her immortal and able to lead the cult forever. For this, the baby was monitored all the time so she wouldn't be exposed to destructive activities. Her diet was strictly vegetarian, and no one around her could even have negative thoughts. Oh, and she was also to learn metaphysics. Her beliefs were to be designed in a certain way from the start, and she was to be told about death as something that could be avoided. But this whole maniac stuff didn't work for long, because in 1940, the organization had started running low on funds. Because he could no longer afford this extensive experiment, he decided to give Jean back to her parents. But even at this point, he made sure to share the immortality recipe with them. But Jean's parents were not having it, and the advice was discarded. He was later accused of fraud in 1942 and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, in 1955, he committed suicide, and the experiment to become immortal came to an end. Number 2. Leonard Jones. This guy has an interesting story. But first, let me tell you that he definitely looked a lot like Hagrid from Harry Potter.
Sorry about that.
The only thing that was different was the fact that Leonard Jones was a real person and not a fictional one. Samuel Howard Ford, in his book, described him as a tall and big man with a beard so long that it touched his knees. He wasn't an immortal. I don't think I even needed to mention that. But he did cash that claim a lot. He was a politician by profession, and not a very successful one at that. But he knew how to make sure people were convinced by his bullshit claims. Don't believe me? Well, this man over here actually had his entire political career standing firm on one claim, and that was of him being an immortal. And yes, People did actually vote in his favor because of this one very, very false claim. Throughout his political career, he ran for the position of governor of Kentucky and president of the United States multiple times. The funny thing is that this man never really put forward anything that he'd to help the people out, but instead, his only argument was his supposed immortality. More like he thought this claim made him the sole owner of the titles he was running for. One of the most hilarious and stupid claims he made was after he lost against Lincoln, and his assassination followed it. Apparently, he believed that Lincoln's assassination was just divine justice, because the seat belonged to him all along. According to Jones, one could easily achieve immortality by praying and fasting regularly. Well, I guess he didn't do it right and missed a prayer, because at the age of 71, he was found dead on the 30th of August, 1868. The cause of death? Pneumonia. Guess my guy couldn't convince pneumonia that he was, in fact, immortal. Number 3, Count of St Germaine. The story of the Count of St Germaine is one of the most interesting tales when it comes to immortal beings. He was no ordinary man. In fact, this European adventurer was pretty famous among the elite class back in the 18th century, mostly because of his interest in science and how good he was at what he did. But that wasn't the only thing that made him an interesting figure. Instead, his young looks were the talk of the town. He was attractive and young, but many accounts suggest that his skin looked like it never saw time. His personality was full of secrets too. It's said that the Count of St Germaine was always on the move, and that's what made him even more mysterious. By the late 19th century, many people had become suspicious of him, and there were just too many myths revolving around him. One weird thing was that no one really knew whose son he was and when he was born. Though he claimed to be the son of Francis II Rákóczi, the Prince of Transylvania, many believed that it wasn't really the truth. Let me explain why. St Germaine, in 1779, told Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel that his age was 88 years. Now, if you do some maths, it makes him 15 years old in 1691, when his supposed father Francis was born. How come the son was 15 years older than his father? Another thing that's important to mention is the fact that throughout his adult life, he was seen hiding his real identity, and almost no one knew what his actual name was. Some say his name was Simon, and he was a Jew, while others state that he was possibly of Spanish descent, and his name was Amar. But none of these claims ever got any confirmation. However, one thing that everyone thought was true was that he was immortal. Many believed that he was the wandering Jew, and others believed that he possibly got elixir of life and was still alive. In fact, some even say that he had prophesied the French Revolution. And if that's true, it changes the whole trajectory, because that makes him a time traveler more than an immortal being. It is said that in 1779, he went to Eckernford, Germany, and in 1784, he died there in his house. But mind you, none of these accounts were confirmed either. The reason? His grave was not found anywhere in the town. Number 4, Nicola Tesla. Most people know Nikola Tesla as the great inventor and the one who practically shaped our future. But did you know that he actually wished to live forever too? Apparently, he had a longevity protocol that maybe helped him live longer than he was supposed to. I mean, he did live 20 years more than the average life expectancy of his time, but at the end of the day, he also died and couldn't achieve immortality. He lived for 84 years, and just so, back then, the average life expectancy was only around 62.4 years in America. Even in his homeland, Croatia, the average life expectancy at that time was only 65 years. It's said that at a very early age, Tesla had encountered the death of many close relatives, including his own brother. And that was one of the main reasons why he was so into believing that a proper lifestyle and some science could really help him stay alive for longer. In March 1935, one of Tesla's articles was published in Physical Culture, in which he talked about how he was able to live long. According to him, people should only eat 2 meals loaded with protein and fat in a day and must walk 10 miles every day. He was against coffee, cigarettes, and sex too. Yeah, you heard that right. According to Tesla, sex wasn't really good if one wanted to live forever. And most importantly, he wanted people to bathe in electricity. He himself would take electric shocks, thinking it would make him live longer. In one of the interviews, he stated, "You, who are one of the masterminds in electricity, do not use it to recharge your own energies." So he practically just wanted humans to put themselves on charge using electricity. But did all of this help him live forever? Not really. Even though he managed to live long, many state that he spent most of his older age feeding the pigeons in the city. He never accumulated any wealth and died in poverty at the age of 84 in the New Yorker Hotel, New York, 1943. Number 5. Nicholas Flamel. Yeah, I know most of you know him as a wizard from Harry Potter and the Fantastic Beasts. But the truth is, Flamel was, in fact, a real person who lived in this world and not just some fictional character. He was a notary who lived during the 14th century. Throughout his life, he earned a lot of money as he speculated over real estate. But he didn't just use this money for himself. Instead, he and his wife, Pernell, were quite generous and spent most of this money on the poor around them. But these deep pockets also invited stories that still live with his name. Apparently, people believed that Flamel had figured out how to make the legendary Philosopher's Stone. The stone was believed to turn any metal to gold and also release the elixir of life. However, that's not really what happened because his gravestone is very much visible in the Musée de Cluny in Paris. But then again, many believe that he probably faked his and his wife's death to avoid the attention of the public, because apparently some Parisians swore to have seen him and his wife attending a performance at the Opera House during the 17th century. That was almost 200 years after his death, by the way. Do you think he might actually be alive? Number 6. Merlin. You must remember Disney's Merlin because every one of us watched him teach us lessons for life. But did you know that Merlin wasn't just a cartoon character, but instead a very important mythical magician in history and mythology? He was most prominently displayed in the legend of King Arthur, but you must have also heard of him in the works of Geoffrey of Monmouth, the British pseudo-historical author. In fact, he was the one to put forward the idea of someone similar to Merlin in his works, and the character was later built up by the French poet Robert de Boron. While the general belief is that Merlin is a mythical magician, there are people who think that he was, in fact, a real person. This could be true because the character itself was based on the North Brythonic poet and seer named Myrddin Wilt. This guy was also popular as Myrddin the Wild for many reasons. Many people believe that Merlin never died and was an immortal being. But then the question arises, why was he so old? Are immortals supposed to grow old? Well, there's a theory about that too. It's believed that he could age but not die, meaning his age would continue to increase, but he will never die. People are wild to think that Merlin still serves the royal family and protects them. I mean, they must pay him well to do a job for this long, right? Number 7. James Bedford. On the 12th of January 1967, Dr. James Bedford died at the age of 73. Yeah, this immortal person's story starts from his very death, but hang on. Bedford suffered from kidney cancer and his lungs were metastasized. But that's not what's important. Instead, what happened after his death is what takes the trophy. His body was not cremated or buried, but he became the first person to have been placed in cryopreservation. The reason? His hopes to come back to life after decades. As of now, he's been in a capsule for over 55 years, and scientists at the facility believe that he'll be brought back to life when the time is right. His body was injected with dimethyl sulfoxide, which would help with preserving the organs and tissues. Then he was frozen with dry ice before being transferred to a liquid nitrogen environment. Now, technically he's there to be alive again, right? So that puts him in the wannabe immortal category. Let's see what happens, because I'm not sure if I'll be here to see him come back to life again. Also, if they do succeed, I'm pretty sure my guy will be disappointed in what the world has become. Number 8. Jack Lucas. This guy might not be immortal, nor did he ever claim to be one, but life definitely loved him too much to hand him over to death. Born on February 14, 1928, Lucas was born in Plymouth, North Carolina. He was only 14 years old when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Unlike others of the same age, he was desperate to go and fight for his country. However, he couldn't get there unless he was 17. But he was so desperate that he forged his mother's signature and made it to the Marines. Even though he was caught, he was not dismissed. And one afternoon, he was fighting on the island of Iwo Jima as a rifleman when 2 Japanese grenades fell into the trench in which he was with his 2 fellow Marines. Lucas saw the grenade and threw himself on it and pulled the other one under him as well. One of the grenades exploded, and over 250 pieces of shrapnel landed inside Lucas's body. Everyone thought that he was dead, but soon it turned out that he was still alive. He went through a total of 26 surgeries to get those pieces out of his body. But this wasn't the only deadly experience he had in his life. After the battle, he tried to get into business, but soon after, he was once again in the army in 1961. During a training jump, tragically, both of his parachutes refused to function properly. Now this time, everyone was 100% sure he couldn't survive. But surprise, surprise, he even survived that fall. Not only that, he also survived an almost fatal fire. How he did all of that stays a mystery, but the almost immortal guy passed away in 2008 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Number 9. Roy Benavidez. Benavidez's story is similar to that of Jack Lucas, and yes, he also slapped death in the face many times. After he graduated from the MP course, Roy was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. By 1965, he had been deployed to Vietnam as an advisor. One day, during a routine patrol with a South Vietnamese Army regiment, he stepped on a landmine. The incident left him paralyzed from the waist down, and the damage was so severe that the doctors had told him that he would never walk again. But well, Roy wasn't really planning to be medically discharged from the Army. He started a nightly personal training routine, and after a lot of work, he could once again stand on his feet. He was back in the Army by 1967, was assigned to the 5th Special Forces Group, and was sent back to Vietnam. On May 2nd, 1968, he was once again risking his life to save his buddy. This time, he was shot in the leg and also got a grenade blast in the face. Even then, he continued to help his team. During this same operation, he was shot in the stomach as well, and another grenade hit his back. He survived all of it. Another attack had him almost blind, and he had blood running from his eyes. While no kind of injury killed him, he finally gave in to death at the age of 63 in November 1998. Throughout his life, he defeated death twice, and that's enough for one to say that he might have been immortal. Number 10. Suumo Yamaguchi. Now this guy was something else for real. I mean, who on earth can survive not one but 2 nuclear attacks? Born on the 16th of March 1916, Yamaguchi was only 29 years old when hell broke loose in Japan. At the time, he was working as an engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Originally from Nagasaki, Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima for work on the 6th of August, 1945. As it turns out, he was actually planning to leave for Nagasaki that day along with his colleagues. They were on their way to the train station when he realized that he had left his hanko behind. Now, hanko is a very important stamp for Japanese people, since that's what they use for important papers and stuff. To get it, he went back to the office, and that's when the bomb hit the city. He was injured severely, however. He survived the nuclear attack. He even claimed to have witnessed the bomber and the parachutes, and that after that, there was a massive flash. His eardrum got ruptured, and he was even blinded temporarily. Not only that, he also suffered from radiation burns. Next day, he returned to his hometown, Nagasaki, and even though he was injured, he even made it to work on the 9th of August. And yes, we all know what happened that day. The second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Apparently, at that moment, Yamaguchi was being called crazy by his supervisor for saying that one bomb had wiped out the whole city. When the second bomb detonated, he didn't get hurt at all, and surprisingly survived another nuclear attack within a week. Even though he didn't sustain any injury this time, he did get a high fever and continuous vomiting for over a week. Later in his life, he became a father to 2 beautiful daughters and a son. He even wrote a book in his 80s about his experience. He was also the only person to have been recognized as a double survivor. As a result of the injuries he sustained in Hiroshima, he lost hearing in his left ear and also went bald for a good while. His daughter recalls that it wasn't until they were 12 that they saw their father without bandages, even though he lived a relatively healthy life for someone who survived death twice. But the radiation poisoning caught up to him in the later years of his life. And these were all the people who either claimed to be immortal, were considered immortal, or acted like death wasn't for them. Which story was the most interesting for you? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I'll be back with more amazing videos soon. See you in the next one. Goodbye.